Coming to you straight from the Rio Grande and beyond. Broadcasting to the four corners of the globe. So grab your seat, your coffee, or your sundowner.
Okay, everybody, here we go.
On point, as always. This is Gloves Off. Gloves Off.
We're back at you with Gloves Off. I'm Paul Buitrón. I'm here with Orlando Marquez, an advocate for children's rights, dealing with the separation of a marriage or custodial rights, and where does it leave the child? How we doing, Orlando? You doing good?
We're doing good, and I'm doing good. And I'd like to thank you for inviting me onto your show and give a little word out and some information to these parents. But first off, I'd like to thank you for all the work that you do for placing these topics, these important topics out there for the public to learn about, for parents to seek you out, seek me out, seek other agencies out. I mean, you do a lot of good work, man. I appreciate the work that you're doing by reaching out to parents, reaching out to legislators, inputting your ideas. I mean, this is all great, man. So just keep up what you're doing, man. And I know that you have your academy. I know you deal with a lot of children. And man, I can't stress how much the role that you play in their lives is a benefit. It's a benefit to their children, it's a benefit to their families, and it's a benefit to society. So
thank you so much for
what you do.
Thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you for what you do, and many others that stand up for the rights of the child. Many of us that go through a divorce.
Do it for the kids.
Many that go through a divorce end up thinking that custody is their own right, which it is. And they're concerned about time for them, but they actually have to do it for the child. And you have to start thinking about the child no matter where you're at, and start actually looking at it, taking it that way, and understanding that. What I'm gonna ask you is, how did you get started? What happened to Orlando for him to jump into this freight train and keep on going down the tracks?
It's a good question. A lot of parents don't understand when I help them out that I can actually relate to what they're going through. I mean, I had my own custody case. Once the relationship with my ex was over, there was a problem when she reached out to family law attorneys to get her legal paperwork created. There wasn't a lot of combativeness. She really didn't have an adversarial stance towards my role as a father, but when she hired an attorney and several attorneys, that's where the actual combativeness started. That's where we actually saw the alienation begin. And I went through litigation. I was given the standard possession order, it's an auto alienator. I mean, it starts at day one when you are an active parent, and all of a sudden that child only has access to you for very few days out of the month. It's automatic alienation, and it's codified and it's encouraged by the judges that we have that are overseeing the merits of these custody cases. So I went through litigation, got the standard possession order as a start, but I continued litigation because it was important. It was important for the child. I constantly reminded mom that I wasn't fighting her. She was a good mother. She's a great mom. She does everything for the child. She takes care of the child. She clothes, and, does everything that a mom should do for the child. She's a great mother. But what I reminded her was that she would always be a horrible father. We have a boy, and, only men, you understand this, only men know what men need. And our child, our boy, needed equal access to his father. So, even though I reminded her she's an amazing mother, she just can't be a father to our child. So I constantly reminded her that, this litigation, this fighting in family court was not directed at her. It was directed at her attorneys and their need to access her resources, her money, her retirement, anything of value that they can get a hold of, they were after from her. So I went through litigation. Eventually, I did within a good amount of time, I was able to get 50-50 for our child, and he's doing great. So I represented myself pro se, didn't hire an attorney, went through the lower courts, then went to the appellate courts. And, it was traumatic at some point, but I have a background, and I really can't go into the specifics, but I have a background in law enforcement. I've been in the community for about 25 years now, and I'm currently working contract security on the federal level. So I understand a little bit about trauma. I understand a little bit about what fathers play in their children's lives and what mothers play in their children's lives. And I understand that our society's problems can be traced back to the fatherless homes. The product of these fatherless homes needs to be addressed. It needs to be discussed. We got to find ways to, create better outcomes for children. So even after I got 50-50 as a pro se litigant, it was critical that because of what I discovered within family law, that it was critical that I continue to try to make these changes and help other parents that are starting their journey or in their journey and trying to remain a part of their children's lives. So what I've been doing the last couple of years is I work with pro se parents. I teach them where they can find their resources. I help them with their drafting of their motions and their pleadings, and make sure that that they're done correctly, they're filed correctly. I work with their demeanor. I work with their interacting with parents to make sure that they're not creating more problems than they already have. I mean, it's very important that their demeanor is professional in the courtroom as well as out of the courtroom. So I do a lot of work with these fathers. It's very important. And you understand, I mean, you certainly understand the need for fathers in children's lives. We definitely have a different nature from women. It's different. And without the parental figure, there's problems, especially with boys. And I mean, you and I can relate, I mean, firsthand that, children they're not influenced by positive men. There's just no other outcome than that they're going to be influenced by negative and troublesome men. So that's why I continued my presence in the family law industry, because we need to create better outcomes for children. And the way to start that change is talking with parents and teaching them what they need to do. And secondary, as a secondary purpose is that I talk to legislators about trying to reform family law and just create better outcomes for kids. It's important that we do that.
You're absolutely correct. And I've been teaching, as well as I've been teaching probably for 30 years now. Okay. And not only here, and I've taught in other countries and other states. You always see the same thing. It's the same pattern, regardless of culture, regardless of where it's at. You can tell right away when somebody brings a child into my school. I know right away, just by me extending my hand to them, if they have a father figure or not. And this is very important for people to realize, because these little things, mannerisms that exist within our society, people are kind of forgetting or not paying attention to. If you have a child that is reared with a father, maybe the father's not, there might not be but he has a father figure.
Correct.
And you extend your hand to shake his hand, and he looks at you and he extends his hand and shakes at you. You can tell right away that he's being reared by a father figure, or a father's involved in his life. Most kids that are not reared with the father in their life, when you extend their hand, they're going to look down and they don't know what to do. Okay? And unfortunately, that's been going on. And I've seen it for the longest time. At first, I couldn't grasp it until later on they pointed it out to me, and it was a police officer that pointed out to me, and it was a student of mine in Dallas, an old gentleman. His name was Scott, and he said, "Look at this," and he was right.
Body language.
Yeah, body language. And so you start seeing that, people do not understand the importance of fathers in a child's life. I understand that sometimes we're not lucky, and sometimes you grow up without a father. something happened, your father was not there. It doesn't mean the divorce. It just something happened, might have passed away in an early stage of life and he's not there. But there's always an uncle, there's always somebody present that's gonna teach that. Now we're losing that, you know? Somebody, and it's true, somebody told me the other day and I was talking to him and I kind of started laughing. He goes, Paul, you know that the average male handshake in 1985, it goes, was anywhere between 120 to 125 pounds of pressure. In 1985, it goes, a normal woman's handshake in 1985 was between 100 to 105 pounds per pressure. So right now, the pressure from the males that are coming up with the 20-year-olds, it's between 100 and 107 pounds per square pressure. And the women are 110. It goes, what's going on? We're not passing on the male, or, you know, what they call now destructive masculinity, or what is it? That they, the different
toxic, they call it toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity, you know, and you're like, but these are things that we grew up with that are now not being passed on. Why? Because we've already have several generations that have been fatherless. Understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. In the industry that I work in, the number one threat to first responders is the product of fatherless homes.
Absolutely.
That's why it's very important. And in my industry, a lot of what we rely on to be able to survive is body language. And that's exactly what you're speaking of, because we rely a lot on what the body says, because most of the time it's involuntary. And we're always transmitting information, whether it's verbal or whether it's through our bodies. We're always transmitting a message. That's why in my industry, it's very important that we do train a lot in what the body is saying. Even when you get up in the morning, what you decide to wear, what shirt you're gonna wear, what pants, what shoes, what belt, the tie that you're gonna wear, all of these things transmit a message before you even speak to somebody. I mean, strangers out in the, out in the street, they can profile or they can judge what type of person you are depending on the message that you're transmitting through body language alone. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that we have a problem with masculinity as a result of fatherless homes, and it's very, very evident in the way that people handshake now. I hear a lot about fathers don't have a nurturing role, but fathers do nurture. I mean, when I'm with my son, I mean, we horseplay a lot, we wrestle, we punch, we kick. I mean, that's how men nurture each other. I mean, sometimes in previous roll calls or at the gym or with my coworkers, when we actually see each other, we try to take a shot to the ribs or, to the kidney. We're not doing that to hurt somebody, to actually cause physical pain, but it's sort of a way that we bond with other males. It's how we nurture each other. It's how we learn to trust each other, that this person is on my side, this person is part of my circle. So, we do have that inherent, that biological drive to nurture, and it starts with our kids, with our children. Yep. So when you see the decrease in the handshake pressure that you're talking about, this directly ties into the lack of fathers that we have in our society. We need to put those fathers back in children's lives.
I always hear from police and DAs that a lot of crimes are coming in from fatherless homes, children coming up from home.
Amen, brother.
It's true. But then you tell them, how come you all aren't enforcing the interference with child custody?
Just
kind of step back and I go, because you guys are the ones that are playing a huge role on that.
Yeah, and you know, I have a huge problem with that. I work on the
And they
federal.
kind of stop and they just don't have anything else to say.
Yeah, they can't process it. But for parents who deal with the lack of enforcement of interference with child custody, or you know, they're faced with officers who don't want to type out offense report, I always tell them, you need to submit some information requests. Get with that law enforcement agency and request their policy and procedure on handling felonies. Every law enforcement agency has their standard operating procedures, their policies on how to handle a felony, and they cannot unilaterally deviate from those policies and procedures. And interference with child custody is a felony. I mean, what you are trying to do as a parent, you're trying to report a crime. So if that officer is wanting to give you an incident report, he's just basically trying to get out of the work of having to file an offense report. And the department has a specific policy on how to handle felonies. In the criminal code of the Code of Criminal Procedures for Texas, 14.01 specifically states that an officer may arrest on site as long as he's in the presence of a felony that's being committed. He can actually arrest on site, and he does not need a district attorney's permission. The district attorney and any law enforcement agency are two different agencies that work independent. So if an officer says, well, we don't act on 2503 because the DA doesn't act on 2503. The DA doesn't have to accept charges in order for an officer to be able to arrest. He has the authority to do so on the spot. The policies and procedures in the DA's office, which is county, is independent from municipal law enforcement, and it's independent from county law enforcement, and it's independent from state police law enforcement agencies. So, you know, these penal codes that are not being enforced, like interference with child custody, it's a huge problem. It is a huge problem, and I help parents file their complaints against officers. And you know, I don't want to say all officers. It's just the bad ones. Those are the ones that need to be singled out. But I teach them how to file internal affairs investigations on those officers that are not following their policy and procedure for their department. We have to do everything possible to get these fathers back into their children's lives. And not only that, but the children have to have access to the fathers. So when I hear parents come and tell me that the officers didn't want to do an offense report, or the officer said, well, no, the DA won't prosecute, it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating because that department has a policy that's very specific on how to handle felonies. And what this officer is doing is he's making the unilateral decision to deviate from his own department's policy and procedure. And
Sure.
It's doing the child damage, and it's doing society damage. And eventually that child may grow up to be part of our prison system. So it's very frustrating.
You know, that's a sad part, but trying to make them realize that's what they're doing, it's kind of like some get it and some don't, or they don't want to accept it. See, they don't want to accept it. And it's frustrating to many parents, you know, and you see that cycle go through over and over and over. And then you start seeing that cycle end up in court. And that you mentioned the word earlier today, which is per se. Explain to the audience what it is, and many do not know.
Pro se within Texas means that the litigant is going to represent themselves. It requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of work. You don't have to necessarily be an expert on family law. You just have to be an expert on your case. And fortunately for all parents, they're experts at their own case because they're the ones who are actually living it. Their reality is their case. So a pro se litigant is going to draft their motions, they're going to draft their pleadings, they're going to make their own arguments in court, and they have to follow a certain set of statutes and civil rules of procedure, and if they go the route, the appellate rules of civil procedure, so or the appellate rules. But it's basically a parent who decides that they're going to represent themselves. It is a lot of work. It requires a lot of reading, a lot of research. But I remind parents, it doesn't require a lot of intelligence. I mean, to become a lawyer, you don't have to be intelligent. And I think a lot of us have seen that. You don't need to be an intelligent individual to be able to obtain a bar license. The only thing that's required is that you have a good memory. That's it. That's all that's required. So as a pro se litigant, I learned a lot of valuable skills. And what I do now is I work with other parents and I help them become pro se litigants as well. And there's many of us out there. So, you know, if I don't know something or if I didn't research something in my own case, what I do is I'll refer them to parents who have. And this is how we're able to collectively, as pro se parents, we're able to create these outcomes for children that are basically a lot more positive outcomes than what this court system is creating. But you know, the first phase in me working with parents is controlling their emotions. And you understand this because you teach self-defense. And that is critical, that these students of yours don't act on emotions. And the same way as a pro se litigant should not act on emotions too. There's a huge problem when adults make decisions based on their emotions, because emotions are fickle in that they change all the time. So when a parent makes a decision based on their emotions, it's almost guaranteed to be a mistake, because that emotion is going to change often. So the first thing that I do is I work with the parents in processing their emotions. I teach them what their body is going to undergo as far as psychological effects and physiological effects. Now, I can't speak for women because I don't work with women too much on that part, but I do actually work with a lot of fathers. And from what I know from experience is a father comes out of his first temporary hearing pretty much destroyed. He's lost his children. A lot of times he lost his home, a significant part of his income. And you know, he's lost a lot of his purpose. His children, they represent your hopes and dreams. And when you take those away, then, you know, depression sets in really fast. So, you know, I talk to fathers a lot, and, you know, I explain to them that, you know, father without the purpose to continue fighting is it's going to go about rudderless, he's shiftless, he's aimless, and he's destroyed. Absent that fatherhood purpose, there's no leverage for achievement, and there is a very small will to survive. And absent their father, children have a high probability of just drifting through life themselves. So, you know, I help fathers a lot in dealing with litigation. I remind them, look, this is not just a small phase in your life. It's pretty much a lifestyle. If your child is young, Texas family law is designed to continue for many, many years. And, you know, like in your industry and in mine, a purpose is delivered by endurance. And endurance is more than just putting up with. It's through resistance that wills are broken. It's through struggle that defeat is inflicted. You know, it's upon resistance that compliance is enforced. And that's what pro se parents are doing. They're trying to preserve their rights, and they're doing it through fighting family law industry. These are basic principles that fathers exercise within family courts in order to preserve their children's rights and their own rights. And the family law industry, they like to call these parents vexatious litigants because they want to cast a negative shadow upon these dads who oppose the current court-created standards that family law operates. And facts are what they are. So, you know, there's a lot of trauma in family court, and the very first phase in working with parents is their emotions. If I can't get that parent or that father's emotions under control, he's not going to create a lot of positive progress for his children. And you know this. I mean, I'm sure you see this in your classroom all the time. Emotions have to be controlled, or not. There's consequences for not being able to do so.
You're correct, and you see a lot of the fathers, the ones that I've talked to, they've come out of that. They're battling it. They don't know what to do. and they have a 2, 3 year old. I mean, you're going to be dealing with this till that child is 18 years of age.
Yes.
You know, and you better get it straight now. You know, and you tell them, make sure it's on paper, make sure you change the decree. And some of them say, no, it's okay. You know, she already changed, she already talked to me. And then about 2 years later, they have no child, they have no visitations, they have nothing to work. They're worse off than when they started. So if you're going through a divorce, make sure everything is placed on the decree. You know, I told this to a student of mine. I've known him for many years, and he said, he goes, Prof, I'm gonna go get married. I'm gonna get married. I said, okay. And I said, why don't you make a prenuptial on parenting?
Right. Right.
And he goes, what are you talking about? And goes, I'm gonna get married because you never know when something happens, you guys end up in divorce court. And it sounds bad, it sounds ugly up front, prenuptial on marriage, or maybe that's the way it should be going on now. Because right now that you guys are lovey-dovey, you guys can sign off on 50-50 co-parenting.
And that reflects on what I just talked about, what I just mentioned, is that they're making their decisions based on emotions. And unfortunately, in our society now, when you make your decision based on emotions, it's almost guaranteed it's going to be a mistake. And we see that a lot. We see the marriage rates that are nosediving because although marriage requires the consent of two adults, it only, in the state of Texas, it only requires one parent to deviate from it. So even though a man decides to get married, it's not up to him whether he remains married.
Absolutely.
It's very destructive. We need to make some changes on that too. During this COVID era is what I call it. We've had some negative things and positive things come out of it. And one of the positive things is that we can watch live streaming of some of these custody cases. And I pay attention a lot to the pro se litigants, especially the fathers, because I can relate to them the most. But in watching the live streaming of custody cases where dad is pro se, what I often see is him freezing. What I see personally, because of my industry and what I've been trained and the exposure that I've had to all kinds of people, is I see the desire to get away. What that tells me is that there's an activation of the mobilization responses. All of the things that we're wired to do during these threatening or dangerous situations. These things often get shut off for fathers because of so much litigation abuse, false allegations, parental alienation techniques from both an ex and their attorney. There's discrimination by the judges. There's threats of financial destruction, and the long-term damage that just family law in general brings to their children. So let's get this clear and upfront that divorce and separation isn't what does the damage to children, the irreparable damage. It's the family law industry's need to discriminate against fathers and their need to remain sexist towards mothers that brings that irreparable damage to children. That's why we need reform. That's why we're trying to change these statutes. So anyways, back on topic. What's happening that I see is the body's natural reaction to danger, and this fight or flight responses is forcefully suppressed when these fathers, you see them freeze during their court appearances. This causes enormous trauma. That's what the father is undergoing. He is experiencing enormous trauma. A father can either flee or if he does, he gets a default judgment against him and he is punitively punished for fighting. He is threatened with contempt and jail. The mobilization responses get stuck, they're frozen. After the hearing, that switch gets activated and the surge of emotions flood the body. We see this all the time. Fathers come out and they're, to be frank, they're pissed. This sets off all kinds of chemical reactions, and repeating this process often results in irreparable damage, and it leads to depression. We see this all the time, fathers going directly into depression. And unless they have a support network, then it's going to compound. So
No, you see that. You see that dramatically. Those are great points of observation, because you see fathers all of a sudden going to depression, and the first thing that they do is they go hit the bottle. They're going to go out and they go hit the bottle in different areas, and guess what? They're going to get more into trouble. They get a DWI, or they get into a fight, or what happens, and they get a criminal record. Then the ex's or attorney uses that against them. It compounds. So there should be some classes afterward, that need to be offered for people to kind of put back in. And after so much trauma that is caused to some of these fathers, you can see them walk around, and when you talk about their kids, they kind of just fade out. They'll give you 1-2 words like, oh, they're okay, and then they'll talk about something else, and you can tell that they've been damaged. And then they say, each case is different, like you said, and everybody kind of goes through the same patterns. It's true, but folks need to understand that if you see somebody going into that, you have to grab a hold of them, pull them out of that rabbit hole, because once they go down that rabbit hole, they're lost. You can go into suicide, you can go into so many other things that can occur, that we need to be very careful and very watchful when we see somebody that's close to us going through this, for us to be able to reach out and pull them out of that rabbit hole.
Right,
It happens.
that's very important. And even though if you can't help them yourself, just grab a hold of them and link them up with somebody who can provide that help.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of parents out there, and we each have our individual skills, and we all provide something to this movement. So it's very important that if you can't help that parent, just don't say, well, I can't help them, and just turn around and walk away. Grab a hold of them and link them up with somebody who can help them, somebody who's enduring what they're going through or has endured what they're going through. And, just let them know they're not alone, because they're not. Now, what happens to children when they're, and a lot of people don't speak about this. They emphasize the parents' viewpoints in court. Most of the decisions that are made in court are parent-centered, and they're not child-centered. And this is very, very frustrating when I see these proceedings. Both parties want to talk about the other, and attorneys encourage this because it creates billable hours, it creates continued litigation, but rarely do I actually see anybody speaking about what the child needs and what's best for the child, what's actually best for the child. So in the early stages, when a father is removed from the child's life, what happens is the stress of separation from their fathers alters what's called the amygdala in the brain. That's a key structure in threat processing, emotions, and as the child develops, it alters connections with other brain areas, affecting their ability to develop proper self-regulating abilities. And I'm sure you get a lot of children that are brought in from their parents to your school because they can't self-regulate. They need help in some area, and they bring them to your school to try to get to compensate for that. But when you have a parent that's removed from that child's life, especially a father who's been there, this trauma eventually affects academic performance when they're in school, and when the children grows up, this affects their personal life. And we see that all the time with children that grew up from fatherless homes. They have a very difficult time establishing relationships, not only personal relationships, but relationships at work, relationships with their neighbors, and eventually in adulthood, there's an increased risk for psychiatric disorders like anxiety, PTSD. We see mood swings, and we see a lot of substance abuse. Just like you said, we see a lot of alcohol abuse and drug abuse that results from fathers being removed from their children's lives.
No, you're correct. And, things happen. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
They can send me an email, and my email is O Marquez, and that's OMARQUEZ at tfrm.us. That's my email for the Fathers' Rights Movement, and they can send me questions. They can ask for advice. We can talk about processing some of their emotions. I mean, that's key. That is very key. We can actually even talk about, their children, what their children are going through because of alienation. And I think, like I said, it's very important that children are an emphasis in these proceedings, because we don't do that. And the children's feeling of safety and their ability to bond with others, their ability to detect and respond to dangers, and the ability to self-regulate one's emotions. I mean, this is vital, not just for the child, but later on in life. And the early disruption of these functions alters the physical, emotional, and cognitive development that results in lifelong changes. So as soon as these parents need help, they need to reach out. They need to get a hold of me, or they need to get a hold of any other family law reform group. And I advocate for different groups. I advocate for Americans for Equal Shared Parenting, for the Fathers' Rights Movement. I advocate for the Fathers Anonymous, Americans for Parental Equality. They can find me through my email, and I'll respond. If I can't help them, what I'll do is I will refer them to somebody who can. And I know parents all across the state of Texas that are just dying to help other parents create better outcomes for their own kids. So
you're absolutely correct, and it's a good movement, because you've always helped us. You helped me in mine when we were going through some rough times, and everybody else does. So folks, when you guys are going through something like this, somebody like this, and here in Laredo, and you can't get a hold of Marquez, give me a call. My email is buitronacademy2012@gmail.com. Tell me what it is. You can find me on Facebook. You can send a comment, and we'll connect you to the right source one way or another. There's so many other sources, there's so many other different, variants for custody and visitation that can be done now, that sometimes lawyers do not talk about, and they should be talking about. And
right, and also the Fathers' Rights Movement
should be accepted.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that the Fathers' Rights pages, there's a group in every state, and there's a crisis line that they could reach out for also, and it's posted on every of the Facebook state pages. It's easily accessible, or they could get a hold of me through my email, and that email again is OMARQUEZ@tfrm.us. And we just have to get these parents, man, to reach out. We have to get these parents to reach out. We'll work with them. We'll work with their emotions. We'll work to get them prepared to, create better outcomes for their kids. We'll teach them how to interact with legislators. But we have to connect with these parents. And there's a lot of parents out there that just don't reach out, and they're not designed to do it by themselves. I mean, fathers or men in general are not designed to do things on their own. We see this in teams, those fathers who like to watch sports. Those teams don't work by themselves. They work in conjunction with other men. We see this in the military. We see the military that is comprised of many men. They're all working together. And, for those of us who are religious, you could look to Jesus. Jesus had his own group of 12 men. So when you look at our society now, and you look through the history of humans, men are just not designed to do things on their own. So if there's dads out there that need help, and you're trying to do this all by yourself, it doesn't work that way. They have to reach out to us. They have to connect to other fathers. This is how we get things done. This is how we make progress. So you want to make progress for your kids, it's very important that they reach out to us. They connect.
Well, thank you so much for the good words and great ideas and ideas to ponder on, because there's a lot of people out there that I know they're going through this. Thank you once more for what you do, folks. We're out about time, but if you don't want to reach me, I'm at Buitron Academy 2012 at gmail.com. If you like the show, press like, press subscribe. But this is for you all out there. You know, our channel is now growing a little bit more than what it was. We've been paying more attention towards YouTube, crossing some milestones. But, so we're getting more subscribers, which is good. People are out there listening. We're touching base.
And Paul, I love what you do, man. I love what you do. And other fathers and other parents, mothers and fathers, they love what you do, man. So do not stop what you're doing. It's a good thing that you're doing, man. A good thing.
Well, thank you. We're going to continue. We're going to continue moving forward. Remember, every story makes our community. Until next time. Yeah. Okay. Until next time. Peace.
All right. Thanks again, man. Have a good day.
Today, in America, more than 5.5 million men, women, and children train in a martial art regularly. Buitron Academy has been serving Laredo for over 30 years now. Our adult classes are geared for producing the best in you, teaching you street-ready techniques. With the arts of Savate and Kenpo, you'll learn the traditions of these sciences of combat as passed down professor to student.
Hello everybody, my name is Senior Grandmaster Alfredo Bandalan, owner of BDP, Bandalan the Siparis. I'd like to say a few words on Grandmaster Paul Buitrón. He's a man of great integrity, a man of great knowledge of martial art. He's a master of Savate and master of Eskrima. He's a man that can help you to become what you want to be. He's a man that teaches people how to be somebody in life, how to work the world, how to be happy in this world. He's a man that I can say hold many integrity as well as in martial art. But I'd like to say this man has a radio station, does hunting all over the world, and he works with all kind of people, all walks of life. All I want to say, that Paul Buitrón is a man that can help people to be somebody in life. I'd like to say aloha, thank you.
I am Grandmaster Michael Duran of Original Hurones Criminal Federation here in Vallejo, California. Professor Paul Buitrón is an accomplished martial artist who has developed an understanding that as a caretaker in our martial arts, it is his responsibility to keep the art alive and in depth. He acknowledged that it is the students that give the art life. I hold his friendship and his continuing accomplishments in the art in the most highest regard. Thank you.
Come train at the best kept secret of Laredo. Give us a call for your free evaluation at 956-401-4868 or check out our website at savate.biz. Follow us on YouTube and Facebook.